this class has been ordered and programmed. There's no spontaneity in it at all. And actually, this place is chaotic until that green light comes on, then everybody gets quiet and look at me and goes, Dr. Egan, you're a fool up there. But anyway, we're having fun and learning something. And our next class, we're going to look at Islam, and we have, where are you from?
India.
We have India, where?
My parents are from India.
From India, and Tam? Tam, where are you from? From Vietnam. See, we have, they and Samara are going to do, look at Islam, and we're going to look at some of that. And we're going to look at bicultural stuff next class. And we were just having fun at how the East, Near East and the Mid East, everything's coming together, and we're sort of bonding. And I'm being silly. When I get nervous, I get silly. But, oh, you know what? I forgot to hand this around. I'm not even on the air. I'm on now. Oh, you did? Okay. Sorry. We're on the air now. We've got a lot to do today. We're going to look at homosexuality, and that as another sort of minority phenomena. But before we do that, I want to just finish up. We were looking at masculine and feminine energies. Can you put the little deal right here, please? We were looking at masculine and feminine energies, and remember, this is not necessarily male or female. It's just we're qualifying these kind of energies. It's a good test question. But last week we looked at Native Americans.
Way out of focus. Way out of focus.
I'm way out of focus?
Yeah. A little bit. Zoom out.
Can you put it in focus? Zoom out. Zoom in. You know, that must be me up here. Hi. Oh, here it is right here. That way or the other way? Oh, that's it. Yeah, y'all just go get something to eat in the refrigerator and come back. We'll be right with you. Okay, there's masculine and feminine. And we were looking at that some cultures have more of this feminine, egalitarian connection with nature, community, different cultures, individuals, tribes, families have this. And what are some of the Native Americans do? We looked at Asians, although we saw a lot of negative patriarchy, but this sort of feminine issues. But one of the things I wanted to do is we're doing these positive projections. We're going to look at more of what that is. Positive projections on Native Americans. So, in other words, as we look at a culture or people, and we're going to stereotype, you can't help but it. What are some of the positive things you like about Native American, American Indian cultures? That, what? Andy?
Connection with nature.
Yeah, nature. See, I'm very. How many in here are really connected to nature? Just like to be around nature. That's a. Native Americans, as I said last class, some people think, Native Americans think that the white Europeans came over here because their religion disconnected them with nature. And that one of the meanings of coming here was so that Native Americans could help them become whole people and reconnect. What are a few other things you like about Native Americans? And they all looked and said, is there spirituality, which is like a part of their life all the time? They don't separate it. Anything else?
They seem to be like calm and like they're real, not reserved, but they're.
Yeah, it's kind of a Buddhist thing, isn't it? That Eastern centeredness, that sort of a quietness of soul, inner peace. That's good. And I'm telling you, if you live in the world I live in, I need inner peace. And as I get older, I learn a lot from my Native American friends and rituals and things that I do to find that inner peace. And I integrate it into my own spirituality. But the Native American, anything else necessarily? Hi. Why are we looking at me? What? Heavy drug use? Oh, smoking dope. Okay, that's really a positive thing. Yeah, Mom, Dad, I started smoking dope because I went to the... Yeah, well, let's say... How about herbal medicines? I don't feel good putting drug use on here.
Now, are these masculine, feminine, or?
No, forget this. Yeah, I'm just honoring that many of these things tend to be feminine traits. You with me? In terms of soul and relatedness and inner peace, nurturing. Yeah, that's you.
How about the fact that like they're the only non-immigrants here?
Yeah, it's sort of their world, isn't it, that we showed up in. Of course, how did they get here? They immigrated from Siberia.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know what you're saying, though. But anyway, but very, very settled people. Anyway, there's a lot to learn, and you may find as you get older, you're drawn to aspects in Native American culture to enhance your own life. Yesterday, I went to a workshop on Muhammad, blessed. What am I supposed to say? Peace be upon him. And stayed for about an hour. It was very interesting and learned a lot. And the man who was teaching, he apologized to the crowd, and there must have been maybe 75, 80 people there, that Islam has not been taught more in this culture. And he said, it's our fault. We don't teach, and people have all these misunderstandings. He said, whatever your religion is, if you learn from Islam, it'll enhance your religion. Your religion will become, your own faith will be enhanced more. And that sort of was a challenge to me. I thought, wow, that's cool. I want to learn and grow. So I bought one of the tapes, a PBS tape on, this is Muhammad's life and stuff. But it seemed interesting and worthy of learning something from that. We'll look at more of that the next class. Okay. And then this quote here that I handed out, that those of you that, I want to read this, because this is from Walt Whitman, the transcendental movement of early Christianity in America that was getting away from connection with the earth. And, Thoreau and Abraham Lincoln, many of these early people were more transcendent in their faith because they were connected to the earth. And let me just read this. I don't think I've read it here before, but it's good. He says, "Welcome is every organ and attribute of me, of any man hearty and clean. Not an inch or a particle of an inch is vile, and none shall be less familiar than the rest. In all people I see myself, I see the good or the bad, and the good or the bad I say of myself, I say of them. I am the poet of the body. I am the poet of the soul." Walt Whitman, an American, one of the roughs, a cosmos, disorderly, fleshly, sensual, eating and drinking and breeding, no sentimentalist, no stander above men and women or apart from them, no more modest than immodest. I believe in the flesh. And do you see how that just goes against the religious world that's so much spirit that you just run away from body and humanness at some level? I believe in the flesh and the appetites. I see hearing and feeling are miracles, and each part and tag of me is a miracle. Divine I am inside and out. I make holy whatever I touch and am touched from. The scent of these armpits is an aroma finer than prayer. Boy, that's something I don't want to smell. The head is more than churches, Bibles, or creeds. Logic and sermons never convince. The damp of night drives me deeper into my soul. You must inhabit yourself to the dazzle of light and of every moment of your life. See, he's just connecting to everything. Do I contradict myself? I love this part. Very well, then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. I sound my barbaric yelp over the roofs of the world. This is Whitman's Song of Myself, which is actually a little book. Has anybody ever seen it or know of it? It's a great little book. And one time, about 4 years ago at Brazos bookstore, they read this thing from noon till midnight, and the whole Song of Myself, and different readers from around the city came. It was really interesting. But you see how that kind of gets you that earth and nature and connection with that. And I just want to honor that aspect of culture and people. Okay. Any questions? That won't be on the test, but it will be. Right there. The Native American I wrote? Yeah, there it is. And again, what I'm trying to do with this is just, whenever we talk about something, see, one of the things Whitman said is, I contain multitudes. And see, it's the Hindu concept that thou art that. I am everything. Everything is me. Yeah, come on in, Lanny. Grab him out there and tell him to come in. Yeah. So that's part of what we're looking at. Today we're going to look at homosexuality and homosexuals as a subculture. And what's interesting is most of this tends to lean toward gay men. And I heard one woman in this tape I'm going to show you in a minute. She says, yeah, about 10% of all the research is men and not so much lesbian stuff. But I'm certainly not trying to lean to one side or the other. It's just about all the homosexual world and heterosexual world. And this was interesting. Attitudes toward homosexuality have varied considerably. A number of studies from other cultures have revealed a widespread acceptance of homosexual activities. One survey of 190 societies, you don't have this, I do, found that 2/3 of them considered homosexuality socially acceptable for certain individuals on specific occasions. Homosexuality has been widely accepted by many early cultures. For example, over 50% of the 225 Native American tribes accepted male homosexuality. 17% accepted female homosexuality, and there's a study done that I'm not going to quote. In ancient Greece, homosexual relationships between men were considered superior intellectual and spiritual expression of love, where heterosexuality provided a more pragmatic benefits of children and family union. And some societies, even in cultures over the decades and centuries, require members to engage in homosexual behavior. For example, all male members of a Zambian tribe in the mountains of New Guinea engage exclusively in homosexual encounters from 7 years until their late teens or until they marry. Part of their ritual stuff. And there's some other stuff here that Clarence asked me not to read, and I won't. But it's interesting. Just trust me, I won't read it, but you can look stuff like that up. Okay, what I want to do is today is I want to talk about 4 religious views of homosexuality, and then have our presentation, and then look at the film. Cool? And again, this is another good test question thing. Oh wait, I have this someplace. And this is let me do this. I just love making that little noise, that little ripping thing. As a kid, I was always banging pots and pans. You'll probably know me well enough why my mother was glad to see me leave the house. And I was writing shorthand and put homosexuality. And then I thought if I said that, y'all would laugh and giggle, and for obvious reasons, since most of you have a sick mind. But this is a kind of sickness we need in this world to make it with this madness. But here are 4 religious views, and I want to comment on each of them. And the first one is and these are pretty much worldwide views depending on your religion and creed and ethnicity and sacred texts. And the first one is the rejecting primitive view of homosexuality. And this is unconditional punitive. Rejecting - punitive view of homosexuality. And this is unconditional rejection, JECT, of homosexuality. I might have just come up with a new word, but I'm sure of homosexuality. And that includes, and what that view does is it condemns, homosexuals are condemned, NMED, are condemned and ostracized from the religious community. religious community. That's that rejecting punitive. And some of this went on in the Middle Ages. Some of this still goes on right now. And if you are aware, there are certain religions, different Christian denominations, different world religions that have a very condemning view of that. And in this view, there's this view uses literalism of sacred text. Of the sacred text. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying they do that. And that sacred text may be the biblical scriptures, the Quran, or whatever. And you'll find in cultures there's more liberal views, fundamentalist views. There's just a broad range of views of how people look at sacred text. And while I'm here, let me, using this rejecting punitive view, I gave you a handout, which y'all can get off of the internet if you don't, from Dr. Laura, who's, I guess, on the radio and on TV. Is she also on TV? And she's pretty stiff in her back to the Ten Commandments view, and it's certainly one view, but this is sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing I want to read that's kind of interesting. Is you can see how sometimes it can be absurd if you don't take the sacred, if you literalize sacred text, you can get yourself in a huge trap. He says, "Dear Dr. Laura," well, I'll just read it because you can't read it on here anyway. "Thank you for doing so much to educate people regarding God's law." This is satirical, of course. "I have learned a great deal from your show and try to share that knowledge with as many people I can. When someone tries to defend homosexual lifestyle, for example, I simply remind them that Leviticus 18:22 clearly states it to be an abomination. End of debate. I need some advice for you. I do need some advice, however, regarding the specific law and how to follow them. Number one, when I burn a bull on the altar as a sacrifice, I know it creates a pleasing odor for the Lord. The problem is my neighbors. They claim the odor is not pleasing to them. Should I smite them? Number two is I would like to sell my daughter into slavery as sanctioned in Exodus in this day and age. What do you think would be a fair price for her? Number three, I know I'm not allowed to contact with a woman while she is in her period of menstruation uncleanliness. The problem is, how do I tell her? I have tried asking, but most women take offense. Number four, Leviticus 25 states that I indeed possess slaves, both male and female, provided they are purchased from a neighboring nation. A friend of mine claims this applies to Mexicans but not Canadians. Can you clarify, why can't I own a Canadian? Thank you for somebody laughing. This is all satirical, but it often shows the difficulty we have in dealing with sacred texts and applying them, because there is an evolution of our understanding while maintaining the basic truth. Number five is I have a neighbor who insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35 clearly states I should put him to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself? 6, a friend of mine feels that even though eating shellfish is an abomination, lesser than homosexuality? I don't agree. Can you settle this? 7, Leviticus 21 states, I may not approach the altar of God if I have a defect in my sight. I have to admit that I wear reading glasses. Does my vision have to be 20/20, or is there some wiggle room here? You have to have a sense of humor to look at our religious world, lest you get in a trap. Number 8 is most of my male friends get their hair trimmed, including the hair around their temples, even though it is expressly forbidden. How should they die? Number 9, I know Leviticus 11 that touching the skin of a dead pig makes me unclean, but may I still play football if I wear gloves? Number 10, my uncle has a farm. He violates Leviticus 19, planting 2 different crops in the same field, as does his wife, by wearing garments made of 2 different threads, cotton and polyester. He also tends to curse and blaspheme a lot. Is it really necessary that we go to all the trouble of getting the whole town together to stone him? Couldn't we just burn them to death in a private family affair like we do with people who sleep with their in-laws? I know you have studied these things extensively. Yak. So I am confident you can help. Again, thank you for reminding me God's Word is eternal and unchanging. And that's kind of risky for me to read that. I don't mean to step on anybody's toes of our sacred worship, but literalism can get us into a lot of trouble. I find most time over the years, most people haven't really studied theology over the years and integrated their own faith experience, and it takes a long time to do that over time. Find out what to hold on to and what to modulate if you can. The next one is rejecting a non-punitive view. And this view, maintains that homosexuality is unnatural, and must be condemned. But not the person. This is that old adage of hate. What is this? Hate what? Hate the sin? Without defining that term, but love the sinner. And of course, this religious view that would of homosexuality, that is rejecting of it as a natural thing, a natural sexual preference. It does this view, and it creates a dichotomy, doesn't it? An hypocrisy of some such. And a lot of people tend to have this view in America. But this view supports civil liberties. It supports civil liberties for both gays and lesbians. You see, the first view says it's wrong and you're going to hell. The second view says it's wrong, but you don't have to go to hell. We'll keep you around, but it's still wrong. Yeah, we'll agree to disagree. And it's fine. It's fine that homosexuals are around just as long as my child is not one, doesn't become one, and I don't have one living next to me. It's wrong, but they go live where they want to live and stay away from me. You know that view, kind of? It's very common. And by the way, there are religious leaders all over the world that preach all of these different views and find scriptural texts for all of them. It's very interesting. The third view is the one of at the top here. Is what's called the qualified acceptance. And this view, it's a qualified acceptance. And this would say that this homosexuality, I sure hope that hosex is okay to write that. It would say is wrong, whatever that means. This is a religious view, therefore it's a sin or whatever. But it's qualified. But people cannot change, either psychologically or medically. But people cannot change. And this view says, but if one cannot refrain, C-A-N-N-O-T, refrain from the impulse, the desire, the natural inclination, then one must stay in a committed relationship. In a committed relationship. In other words, find your partner and leave everybody else alone, and we'll understand it. So it's sort of a acceptance, but it's qualified. And this is very common too. And let me say this, because we're in a class of education and we're all about trying to educate ourselves and learn, there's an evolution of our awareness through experience. And I'm not trying to dishonor anybody's place where they are in this evolution as we function religiously and personally and socially and culturally as a pluralistic way, because I believe that there is some hidden truth to everybody's at a deeper archetypal level. Even the most fundamental person, there's a truth they're trying to hang on to. They may be awkward in the way they're doing it, and of course I don't believe in abuse or anything like that. But there's some sacred value that somebody's trying to hang on to in all of these. And I think wisdom says, well, I have to find out, let myself grow and evolve and change or stay where I am in my understanding, but I have to respect that other people are at different places too. And then the last one is full acceptance. And this is the fourth major theological position. And this view sees sexuality, just misspell that, didn't U-A, sexuality as important to human love. That doesn't mean that all love has to be sexual, but that sexuality is an important piece of human love and interaction and intimacy. This view does. And this full acceptance view believes that that sexual ethics include, this is both for heterosexual and homosexual people, it includes commitment, trust, tenderness, and respect for all sexual preference. Sexual preference. This is this third full acceptance view, and therefore, in this view, there is a full religious blessing. And if y'all know, it's going on in the Episcopal Church right now. It's going on in the Methodist Church right now. Many of these churches are struggling to move, as it were, from more qualified toward full acceptance. Y'all realize that's going on in our culture? Has anybody read the paper or watched TV in the last 6 months? Okay. Right. Right. Yeah, Bishop Robertson up in Connecticut, absolutely. And you see how the people are trying to move to this. Of course, the Episcopal Church is splitting over this. The Methodists are splitting, and religious groups splitting is part of the nature of religious groups. I mean, everybody evolves from everything. But this is moving toward this. And then the last one is the last part of this is full acceptance view is full. Let me write full acceptance of religious and civil rights for homosexuals. And see, that's why they're having homosexual weddings and stuff, and some mayors are doing it, some states do it, and some say no, and then hasn't the president said he wants to, and he's probably appealing to the far right of the religious community for their votes, that he wants a constitutional amendment to forbid anything but heterosexual marriage. And of course that would never pass, because what do you have to have, a 3/4? Is it 3/4 vote? 2/3 of all the states in the nation would have to approve of that. I think we're, as a culture, we've probably evolved a little further. One of the best things that has happened over the years is there are a lot of people have come out of the closet regarding their sexuality, and now no longer, the minority is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and everybody has friends that are gay and lesbian and straight and all kinds, and so suddenly it's a personal thing. It's not just a theological, philosophical thing. Okay, but see, that's a good test question. You with me? Is I could ask, what are the 4 religious views of homosexuality, or 4 views, and you could give me these 4 that we just had and say a little bit about each one. Got it? Yep. Let's have our presentation today. You want to come on up? No. They're resisting. Okay, where's your deal? This is Eric and James and Mita. Big hand for them coming up here today. No pressure, but y'all got about 10 minutes, 12 minutes. Take your time, 12 minutes.
Article is that homosexuality is sort of, that lifestyle is kind of created by people once they invented the word homosexual, which according to the author didn't happen until like about a century ago. And before that, there were, homosexual acts going on, but and like Dr. Agan said, the ancient Greeks and the Romans, it was acceptable for men to have sex with other men, and it was kind of sort of a good thing as far as your stature in society. Like a man in a higher stature would be the the more aggressive partner of the two, and kind of like a rite of passage too, like he said. And then they created this word, and it sort of brought with it all these negative views on homosexuality. As psychology in general, like the field of psychology, went into wanting to understand the depth of sexuality in general. So they had to have this homosexuality and then the word heterosexuality to kind of contradict it. Let's see what else I got. I mean, do y'all agree with that? Do y'all agree that it's sort of created in a way, or no? Nobody. All right. I personally think that it's not a myth. I think that people are born with it. However, one thing that the creation of this, the homosexual, that label, what it did do is it sort of prompted the forming of that culture. For example, now if you look at just pop culture now, we have queer eye for the straight guy, boy meets boy. Gay lesbian market is, it's a whole economic market. You go down Montrose and you see rainbow flags and you see, stores everywhere. Music, I mean, everyone generalizes that Madonna, Cher are all like gay-friendly artists. Most of their audiences are gay, They have their own way of talking and group unity, the gay movement, everything like that kind of started from this label that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that's a good thing, especially in light of the whole gay marriage issue and the whole everything that's going on with it right now. I mean, now is a really good time to. What? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
How can you say it's like a good thing when the leading plague among this earth is AIDS, and the only reason it exists is because of homosexuality?
But that's not necessarily true. And besides, AIDS, HIV is infecting more than just homosexuals.
Push the button.
Well, it didn't.
Actually, that's not true. They found that it comes from a virus in Africa. It was a virus that was carried by monkeys.
Are you holding your button down?
I don't have a button.
That button down.
Actually, they found it's recent. They're doing research on it. It's a virus that comes from monkeys, and what they do in some African tribes is they actually eat the monkeys, and when the virus goes into the human body, it changes itself, and that's how the AIDS virus came into existence. A virus from monkeys changed its DNA and changed its composition, and it became the AIDS virus.
It was a similar virus, but HIV means human immune deficiency, not
I know, it
chimpanzee.
changed. The virus changed. They got it from a monkey.
Viruses do tend to mutate, but I mean, HIV and AIDS is not one. You can't say, oh, homosexuality isn't right because of HIV and AIDS. I mean, that's just like saying, yeah. I mean, it's just really has not that much to do with the gay lesbian nowadays. Especially like recently, they say that more heterosexuals are being infected with HIV and AIDS than homosexuals are.
Yeah, you know who the greatest population is? Blacks now.
Mm-hmm.
Blacks and old people. Older people.
But a lot of that heterosexual infection comes from people who are not openly gay, because you have a lot of married couples where you have infidelity and it's on the other foot, whereas the infidelity is with someone who's gay versus straight, and they bring it back home. So it's more than just the heterosexual thing, because you have a lot of people who are, I don't know if this is PC, but they're closet gays, and they spread it around like that also.
I mean, that's also true, but I mean, AIDS is also spread by drug use. I mean, that's a completely different, that has nothing to do with sex at all. It's just they're sharing needles,
How it spread is how it came to be.
But that's not the case anymore. Maybe that was the case.
That'd be a good, you know what'd be good about that is to write your paper on that. That'd be great. Oh no, you don't write a paper in here, do you? Darn. Write an extra credit. I'll give you a lot of credit if you write a paper on how it came to be. Yeah, Andy.
I think he is.
Well, just commenting on what she said, I think most heterosexual marriages that are like infidelity and how they get AIDS is the men or the women, I guess, go to whores, and then they get infected from whores who are having sex with lots of people. It's not that.
Monogamy. You're supposed to be monogamous. If you were monogamous, there would be no problem.
But there's a lot of gay people out there that are monogamous though. I mean, yes, there is the one side of it where it's very promiscuous, but you know, that's not everybody. You can't generalize it like that.
Let's do the last question over here.
I guess I'm going to throw out this question for the rest of the class, but I was just wondering how people would react to like gay and homosexual marriages as far as in reference to like procreation. Like, how would you kind of explain that? Or I guess some people, I don't know, believe in procreation or not, but I mean the propagation of a race. I mean, if people turn gay, then isn't that like kind of a hindrance to that?
If people turn gay?
Yeah, well, you need a sperm and an ovum. And if it's two ovums together, you'll never have a baby. If it's two sperms together.
Yeah, well, there's different ways that gay people can have kids, but...
Did you know that, like, in foreign countries, they don't even educate their kids on it because they have overpopulation, so it's just a way of killing off the masses. They're just going to let them die. Like,
from AIDS?
Yeah, because, you know, there's so many people. Like,
you gotta write a paper. Bring me some articles.
1 billion people in India, 1 billion people in China, and like say 10,000 die a year. That's not even a dent. You know what I mean? So they purposely don't educate people, and that's a fact.
Well, I know. I want to see some articles because if that's a fact, I'd love to see that. Okay, next. You're doing a good job. Hate to move you on, but I got a great film for you. I really wish we could talk more on this, but go ahead.
Okay, my article is on, it was a case on Bowers versus Hardwick, and basically it was a Georgia statute that made it a criminal offense to commit sodomy, and it was punishable up to 20 years in prison. And Michael Hardwick charged with violating that statute by committing sodomy in his own bedroom, and the DA decided not to prosecute unless further evidence was developed. But Hardwick brought a suit to the federal district court challenging that the statute was unconstitutional because it criminalized consensual sodomy. Then the district court, they just dismissed the case, but then the U.S. Court of Appeals, they reversed it, and they said that the Georgia statute violated Hardwick's rights because his homosexual activity is a private and intimate association beyond the reach of the state, and it was regulated by the 9th Amendment and the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. But then in 1986, the Supreme Court went and reversed that, and they said that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, it does not grant fundamental rights for homosexuals to engage in consensual sodomy, even in the privacy of their own home. So my question is, should the government be able to regulate anything that we do in our privacy of our own home, and if so, then what should be the limit?
Nothing like an easy question. That's a great question.
Okay, should the government be able to regulate what we can do in the privacy of our own home? And if so, what is the limit?
I really wouldn't think that the government should be like in everybody's business. Seriously, I think that as long as you like do it behind closed doors, you know, it shouldn't be anybody's problem. You know, me personally, I'd take offense, you know, if somebody was flaunting it all around, you know, saying, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. It's not my problem, you know. But as long as they keep it under closed doors, that's fine.
What's the other argument to that?
So you're saying that it was okay for the people who were making the bombs in their garages? That it was okay?
No, there's it even easier than that. So it's okay to bring little kids over and strip them down and take movies of them? And
I mean, as long as it's in the privacy.
You can do pedophile stuff in the privacy of your own bedroom? The government shouldn't say anything about that?
How can the government regulate 300 million people in the country? They can't. I mean, when you think about it, that'd be a really hard task to do. So, although, I mean, that brings up a good point, like checking up on people, I mean, making the bombs, like, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, they made bombs in their homes in Michigan, that kind of stuff, but how can you regulate 300 million people? I don't know how you do
Okay, this is the thing. No one's saying that you're going to go around like door to door and regulate, but at least you know that there's a law. Whereas if you didn't, then everybody would know that it was okay to just do whatever you wanted to do. And then you really wouldn't be safe then. I mean, some people actually follow laws.
So it's okay to beat children in your home? You can hit them with a rod and a stick? And you can hear them screaming, but the state, stay away because it's my child. I can beat my child and brand them. And
I think my response to that would be that there's always going to be, everything is going to come out, everybody's going to know about everything sometime or another, like for example, if somebody beats a child, somebody's going to hear the screams. So somebody's going to go report it and tell you, hey, go check up over there, So basically, the cops would just come along, and if they saw it, then, that's where the law would come in.
Well, they're like, don't scream.
I mean, and then again,
Okay, keep moving on.
And then again, I seriously think that somebody's going to see something, and they're going to report
in
it.
adverse ways, then it should be punishable, it should be punishable by law, and that's where the government comes in. It's their duty to protect the people, and if protection is not provided, then it's chaos.
But if it doesn't harm anybody, it's okay. The point is, it's a difficult issue, and you have to understand that the price of freedom is, we have these tensions, and it's hard to work with, and we work with it. Yeah.
Just a comment that in Texas, they overturned that sodomy law, and now it's okay for homosexuals to have sex in their own homes, and it's not illegal. There was a case
last year.
There was a case where the cops came to the house and just dragged the two guys out. They're still in their underwear and everything. And charged them. They went to the Texas court, and they,
it's the Supreme Court.
Yeah, no, the Supreme Court, and they overturned the law. So
the conservative Supreme Court now overturned the law. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Good job. Big hand for her.
First of all, I didn't dress up for this. I have to go to career fair after this. All y'all should go, but none of y'all are dressed. Mine is less controversial. It's more about biculturality and not so much about homosexuality. But first of all, we want to talk about ethnic and cultural identity. That's like the way you identify with another culture. So if you take homosexuality as its own culture, then they're like a minority culture. And for example, homosexuals identify with their own culture naturally, just like Hispanics identify with Hispanics and so forth. So identity with a culture group helps the individual self-conceptualize and develop themselves, socially. And the author also suggests that gender-sensitive practices may assist sexual minorities in developing to their optimum functioning or reaching their potential. So with that, I ask you how important is self-conceptualization, like knowing who you are, developing. Moving on. What do I think? I think it's important. I think it's very important to know your roots, to know who you identify with, and know who your people are, and because that helps you. If you're in a business, if you're in a fraternity and you identify with all the fraternity people, and you're in a business fraternity, then you kind of get this more of a business frame of mind. You get a better background, and you're more well-rounded.
The point is, we're all in different cultures all the time. Is that right?
Which is where I'm going right now with biculturality. Whereas,
what a segue. Gosh,
it was right here. It was the next on my bullet points. Biculturality is when a person doesn't only identify with the majority culture, but also with another minority culture. Dr. Reagan used Islam as an example earlier when he was talking to me. Here in America, we live in the American culture, but then the Islamic people, they go back to their house and they speak their language and they practice their culture. And so that's what biculturality is, which I guess we'll talk about
tomorrow.
Next time. And most of us are probably also bicultural, since we're all first-generation Americans, more than likely, or just straight immigrants. So you go home to your own culture and you live at school in this culture.
But then homosexuals are biculture. That's what the article
is. And that's what the article is.
There's an immigration,
Looking closer to homosexuality, not all homosexuals belong to an identifiable culture related to their sexual preference, because a lot of them are closeted. So then, with that, I ask you, how much of an impact do you think not having a cultural identity has on your growth and development? Do you think, try to find another example, something everybody can relate to. Thank you. So you're saying it has a big impact. Okay, there you go. That's what I wanted to hear.
Go ahead.
Identification with a minority group fosters recognition of structural, political, and lifestyle
differences. It makes you more well-rounded, and it helps you reach your potential. We got to go now, don't we?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're doing a great job. He's best dressed presenter. Thank you, guys. Y'all did a great job. Because this is a TV class we're doing. Hello. Oh, thank you. Because it's a TV class, and I want to, we have to stop the discussion. In my class that's not being prepared for TV, believe me, we let the discussion go on and things happen, get some energy going. Actually, the article on biculturalism and homosexuality. Yeah, biculturalism, that article tomorrow I'm going to talk about. There's a good test question in there. What is biculturalism? And then I think there's 6 aspects of it, one being dress, another being language. But that'll be a good test question. But it's in your booklet that we have there. Great discussion about this stuff. It's very interesting. What was that? Because we have such diversity, and I think part of what happens to us, we're always going to bump into other cultures. Wait till you get older, get married, you bump into your in-law culture, and then you have children, and they go to school, and you bump into other cultures at school. You get a job, and you meet somebody in another culture, and then you want to bring them in your culture, and you define your culture. But different cultures, be it national cultures, religious cultures, ethnic cultures, is something you can't escape in this culture, and I think it's a positive thing. This film I want to show you. I have one thing I want to read before I show it to you. It's over here. The fact is that this film was done 10 years ago, but the fact is research over genetic factor of homosexuality, that it comes from a gene, per se, a genetic aspect, have been proven inconclusive, although this film kind of emphasizes that at the time, and it's probably good because but no specific gene has been identified. Any genetic link would only be part of a picture in determining sexual orientation. The other thing is most theories relate to the influence of mothers. You're too close to your mother, that's why you're gay, or whatever, too close to your father, or not close enough. Those are also inconclusive. So no single scientific theory about biology of sexual orientation has been substantiated. Neither have any psychological theories. The fact is nobody really knows in terms of all the data that's been done. But this is an interesting film because it gives you some history, and this guy discovered a part of the brain that he thinks causes sexual preference, but then it's all interesting. So let's roll the film, and I think you'll like it. It gives you a perspective of how we've come along in many ways.
Okay, what causes a person to be gay? What causes a person to be straight? What causes a person to be round? What causes a person to be shaped like an S?
What do you think causes homosexuality?
I've never really given it very much thought.
Causes it? I don't know. I'm not sure causality is something I've ever thought about in terms of homosexuality.
I think, let's say if you like girls and you're always after girls, and if you're ugly or whatever, and they keep on telling you no, and then you don't feel like you're wanted, like you're ever gonna get a chance to get a girl, and it's gonna take too long to meet the right person, and you just wait and you find yourself a man.
Show me a gay person, I'll show you a person whose father dropped him on his head when he was 2 months old. Whose father was passive, whose mother was aggressive.
I wouldn't want my child to be homosexual. It'd be like I did something wrong, in the process of raising him. That's why
How your brain is wired, how, I mean, developmentally, you know, I think there have been studies that have come out that show that a lot of this is, well, inherited or congenital anyway.
In other words, you're saying that people are born with that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they're trying to, you know.
Yeah, I've heard about that. It's in a gene, right? Yeah, I don't believe that.
Well, guess who's here? Is there a TV show you haven't been on? Simon LeVay, PhD, Associate Professor, Salk Institute. Primetime Live, Nightline. You're more famous than you may have ever wanted to be.
The media's overwhelming attention to a little-known professor occurred for one simple reason. Simon LeVay claimed to have made a remarkable discovery about the brains of gay men.
I guess my hypothesis goes back to what's been called the third sex theory of sexual orientation. The idea that sexual orientation is inborn and that it's closely connected with other aspects of sex, you know, our physical sex and other mental traits that are sex differentiated. And so I thought that if that was so, then one should look at the parts of the brain that are closely concerned with our sexual behavior. There's lots of scientific evidence saying that the hypothalamus, and particularly this small region at the front end of the hypothalamus, is directly involved in regulating our sexual drive and sexual behavior.
LeVay's research indicated that certain cell clusters in the brains of gay men are consistently smaller than those of straight men. Other research seemed to support the argument that homosexuality is inborn, but not everyone agrees it's that simple.
Where would we expect homosexuality to be? In the big toe? I mean, of course it's somewhere in the brain. So that's, you know, that's not a surprise. The question is, what is the development of it, is the differentiation of it. And of course, one of the answers that we always like to give is that we don't know what causes heterosexuality. If we knew that, it would be easy to answer the question about homosexuality.
For millions of gays and lesbians in North America, this is not merely an academic quibble. If LeVay is right, if science can prove you were born homosexual, then some believe that civil rights for gays and lesbians will at last be guaranteed. Others, who know their history, are more skeptical.
What strikes me about all these studies together is that it's not sure how they are defining homosexuality, so we don't really know what it is they're trying to account for. In a variety of cultures, and going way back historically, there are plenty of men and women, but we know more about men historically. There are plenty of men who seem to have had a very stable heterosexual life, who nonetheless went to bed with, in most cases, teenage boys on a fairly regular basis. Do they qualify under the definition of homosexual? And if so, is there a different site in the brain that is responsible for their bisexuality?
The notion of humans as having a being or essence, so that there is something called a homosexual, that's something supposed to be some essential part of someone's existence, is a 20th century notion. It really developed in the early part of the 20th century. Before that, there were only homosexual acts that anyone could do. You weren't a homosexual if you committed sodomy. You just committed sodomy.
In medieval times, sodomy was a sin. The church was not concerned with the causes of such behavior, only its eradication. Despite the dawn of the Renaissance, this persecution continued.
Guido Ruggiero has done a book on homosexuality in Renaissance Venice, and what he's demonstrated very clearly is that hundreds, thousands of men were arrested for sodomy. Something like 1 out of 10 in Florence, adolescent boys were arrested. If you were caught and punished, you know, you could be garroted, you could be sawed in half, you could be burnt to death. For example, the men arrested, that's all we know about them. is this single entry in a court document. We don't know whether this was a one-time experience. We don't know whether these men were also sleeping with women. We don't know the proportionate roles that their so-called gay lives and their straight lives played in the overall picture. So we really, again, aren't at all sure what it is that we're measuring here.
After the Renaissance, scientists became uneasy about calling any behavior sinful. This was, after all, the age of reason. Society was now turning to science for explanations of human behavior. By the late 1700s, some scientists were claiming sexual preference was inborn, a concept to resurface almost 200 years later.
LeVay's work is part of a long history of work that those of us writing in this area call biological determinist work. It's work that suggests that organisms are, in some sense, determined by their biology. It goes well back into the early days of the 19th century, and it has a long and dirty history in terms of women and their brain shapes and sizes and what that meant they could and couldn't do. It's always been true that this work has been work that has defended a kind of status quo. It's usually ended up saying straight white men are in charge of things because they've got better brains. Scientists in the 19th century spent hours and hours and reams of paper discovering biological differences. They even discovered that there was a gradation in brain size where male scientists had the largest brains and, journeymen of various sorts, bakers, bricklayers, etc., had smaller brains, and ditch diggers had even smaller brains. So they also got class in as read onto the body. The major scientific answer given throughout the 19th century to disenfranchised groups was that they were biologically inferior.
Now, of course, the idea that there is something biologically different in homosexuals from heterosexuals leads directly to the idea it's a disease, which of course is again nonsense, because obviously having black skin as against white skin is different. Now, whether you make it a disease or not, it's a political judgment. As soon as you make it a disease, then you can argue that it ought to be changed. And if the person doesn't want it changed, then he ought to be forced to change it, involuntary treatment, which was a stock in trade of psychiatry, and it remains a stock in trade of psychiatry.
Scientists and doctors reflect the society in which they live, and Victorian society considered any difference in sexual preference to be a threat to the natural order, the patriarchal system. In the late 19th century, a new term was coined to describe this behavior: homosexuality.
So to call it homosexuality already is a medicalization. It was in some ways it was more accurate, the old-fashioned pre-medical terminology, an abomination against man. That at least sounds like something moralistic. You can get a hold of it. But homosexuality sounds like diabetes.
With this new label came a new breed of doctors called sexologists. They tried to explain same-sex behavior in medical terms. Gay men and women, they argued, were a third sex, somewhere between males and females. Havelock Ellis suggested that gay men had male bodies but female brains. And Richard von Krafft-Ebing published his landmark work, Psychopathia Sexualis.
The sexologists were a mixed bag for many homosexuals. On the one hand, they suggested that women who wanted to love other women were abnormal. They were congenital sexual inverts. On the other hand, though, they suggested that this was a type, and that women could live this way permanently, that they didn't have to consider their love for other women merely a rehearsal in girlhood for the great drama of women's lives. In Germany, a group called the Scientific Humanitarian Committee emerged. It was a group of homosexual men and women who said homosexuals shouldn't be forced to change. This is our identity. We can't help ourselves.
The end of the First World War brought radical changes in the Western world, nowhere more so than in Germany. We often think of the Roaring Twenties as a time of frivolity, an age of carefree innocence. But it was also a time when more liberal ideas were allowed to flourish. One of the most prominent German sexologists was Magnus Hirschfeld. Years of research in the field, both on humans and on animals, had thoroughly convinced him that the cause of sexual orientation was biological. Now, in this new age of liberalism, his idea caught on. If homosexuality was inborn, it should not be a crime. But one group in particular did not agree. They stormed his library and burnt all his books. A few months later, they swept into power. Ironically, Hitler and his followers agreed with Hirschfeld that homosexuality was genetic, which, for them, led to one logical solution.
When the Nazis were in the business of systematically killing people, this was done by doctors. Virtually all the doctors were psychiatrists, and in addition to Jews, the people who were killed were homosexuals. And this was a direct continuation of the German medical biological research on sexuality, which goes back to the early part of the 1900s.
Just as Jews were forced to wear yellow stars, homosexuals were marked with pink triangles. Thousands of gay men and women were imprisoned, tortured, and executed in Nazi concentration camps. When the Allies liberated the camps, homosexuals were not freed. Instead, they were moved to civil prisons. They had, after all, broken the law. Another war was over, and the world was ripe for another change of ideas. The recent Nazi horror left both scientists and society deeply suspicious of biological explanations for human behavior. Psychoanalytic and behaviorist theories gained ground.
The analysts who came from Europe trying to escape persecution were very insecure about their financial well-being. They sided by and large with the medical establishment and a pathological view of homosexuality. This has become part of the psychoanalytic theory.
Pioneered in Europe, today at Montreal's Allen Memorial Institute, they try a different approach, psychiatry. With camera and chart instead of drill and scalpel, they scrutinize the neurotic and psychotic. Here, human behavior is their first concern.
Yeah, I think the post-World War II years were probably the worst time to be lesbian. It was an attempt to get women to go back to the home, to give up the jobs that they'd had. There was an attempt to inculcate in all women the feminine mystique, as Betty Friedan has called it. And of course, women who wanted to live as lesbians had to reject that feminine mystique. You can't live as a lesbian unless you're economically self-sufficient. The psychiatric establishment made attempts to cure women who were not only lesbian, but women who wanted to be independent. That was a sign of their lesbianism.
This is the story of Claire. To all appearances, she is a success. But she has succeeded only in her work and not in the fullness of living. Her capacity for love is still impaired. She is not unhappy, but neither is she happy. She is very much alone.
In this climate of strict gender roles, psychiatrists began to build on Sigmund Freud's theories on the effects of absent fathers and domineering mothers. They argued that homosexuality was a form of arrested sexual development, a learned behavior that could, and should, be unlearned.
Well, to use myself, I mean, I was then at graduate school getting a doctorate. My friends were mostly gay, and we were, intellectually inclined. We were all up there getting PhDs. In other words, in the context of the day, fairly well-informed and fairly sophisticated, and yet we believed to a man, this was a circle of gay men, we believed to a man that we had some kind of innate characterological disorder. The good news was supposed to be that it was a disorder that could be cured if one presented oneself for psychoanalysis on a regular basis. And most of us did exactly that.
Well, did I tell you anything about the nature of the thing? And when I talked to you and we arranged this appointment, I didn't even ask you one thing, so... I went because I was sort of hesitate to go into it, but the fact remains that it's homosexuality, and I want to change. I can't. I've tried turning over new leaves, and that simply doesn't work. Or maybe, at least it hasn't worked yet. I go on dates all the time, not all the time, but occasionally, because. Well, I can be attracted to women, and yet, I don't know that it just doesn't seem to be the real thing. I mean, there's no real attraction, and it's sort of forced. I just don't know how one goes about changing that sort of thing.
When I went into therapy, for the longest stretch, I did so only by accepting the therapist's insistence that I give up my lover, because the view then was homosexual acting out, it was always called acting out, was a way of relieving anxiety. The only way to get to the root cause of the anxiety was to stop the acting out. Then tension would build, this was the theory, within the person, and finally the person would have to look to the anxiety itself and resolve it. And it could be done if one had the commitment to change. That was always stressed as well. One had to want to change, and if one did, one could change. And a lot of us did want to change, overwhelmingly in my generation.
I deal in Odd Girls with a story of a woman who was hospitalized and given shock treatments for her lesbianism until she finally said, okay, I don't like women anymore. I think she was given something like 20 shock treatments. Well, who wouldn't be willing to say almost anything after 20 shock treatments?
You'll feel better alone.
Through my archival research, I ran across, for example, a New York Times headline. The headline said that a cure has been found for mannish women, and the article, of course, suggested that those mannish women were lesbian.
My experience over the years and what I have heard and read suggests that there is no success rate in changing sexual orientation. One can change sexual behavior for limited periods of time by all varieties of means, including brainwashing, including what I've called transference compliance, that is the wish to please the therapist or analyst. to conform with his or her expectations. But this lasts for only very limited periods of time, and it's at great psychological risks. It causes depression, anxiety, and loss of self-esteem because one is losing one's inherent passions.
Then something happened to shatter the complacency of North American society. Alfred Kinsey published his monumental survey of human sexual behavior. He shocked the continent with findings of prevalent same-sex activity among American men.
And what Kinsey did that was so important was that up to that point it was all black or white. And he showed with his thousands of people that he interviewed that in fact people ranged along a whole variety of feelings of sexuality, and over a lifetime it's a whole other. And again, that's one of the questions we always have to ask. What are you asking about? Are you asking about what I'm doing today? You're asking what I've done all my life? And those are they're often different answers, so that the vast majority of men who identify themselves as homosexual, who, what we call at the Institute here, self-label themselves as homosexual, about at least 75% of them have had sex with a woman sometime in their lives. That's, by the way, true for lesbian women as well. About 3/4 of them have had sex with a man at least once sometime during their lives. And there's a reasonable percentage of people who label themselves as heterosexual who have had at least one experience during their lives with a same-sex partner.
It turns out that if you ask men over the age of, say, 25, most of them will self-describe as gay or straight, and very few as bisexual. There are bisexuals. I've met true bisexuals in the world. I might almost be said to be one. I was married and had 3 children. Really came out myself pretty late as such things go. But such things are the exception. Most men know by their mid-20s that they're either gay or straight, and there are some who will be bisexual, but they're the minority.
Kinsey's findings challenged long-held beliefs about human sexuality. Their impact on society was greatly magnified by what was about to happen in the world at large. If the 50s were a decade of conformity, the 60s were one of protest.
Oh, we can't? Oh, there we are. Anyway, I hope it was enlightening, educational. Thank you for your presentation today. Good job. And we'll see you next class. So we look at Islam and biculturality.
Thank you.